Welcome back. We're talking about Sigmund Freud. This is part 2 of the video series on Sigmund Freud. Last time we left off in the adventures of Sigmund Freud, we were talking about his past, his personal history, and we left off with him trying to find fame. He originally started experimenting with eels, but then he discovered cocaine. Wah! Now, let it be known, a couple of things. Your professor, Professor Girding, is in no way endorsing drug use whatsoever. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. So don't think I'm talking about it trying to endorse drug use. Sigmund Freud, the same cannot be said about Sigmund Freud, at least from his past. Also, I want to take a little moment to apologize about how awesome my microphone is because it's recording all of my breathing. So when I listen back to the first video, I realize, oh man, all my students are going to be hearing me just breathe like crazy. So just bear with it. And anyways, let's talk about cocaine. Sigmund Freud's attempt at fame led him to cocaine. He realized, oh my goodness, this stuff is amazing. It was legal at the time when he started experimenting on it, and he realized there's so many benefits to it. Can help with depression, can help you get going, can help you get some work done. It's amazing. So he actually encouraged his fiancée, his sisters, his friends, his family to go ahead and engage in cocaine. Hey, we're all sitting around together. You know what would make this sitting around together a little bit better? La coquina. So he would bring cocaine to the party and researched it. And then, of course, it was discovered cocaine, not so good. Yeah, because people were overdosing, addicted to it. Even though he described it as a miracle drug and a magical substance, he soon became embarrassed about publishing an article of all its splendors. He did this at only 28 years of age, and he pretty much spent the rest of his life trying to cover up the fact that he ever really experimented and endorsed cocaine. There was an epidemic. It was known as the European cocaine epidemic because it was legal for a time. Pretty much everyone and their neighbor's pet dog were addicted to cocaine. So he is known in history as one of the main contributors to this cocaine epidemic. So good old Sigmund Freud, cocaine epidemic endorser. But he tried to erase this from his own history, didn't mention it in his bibliography, etc. So how is he going to find fame now? He tried eels, he tried cocaine, and this is a man who really wants to be famous. So let's move on from talking about Snow White. So he decided, oh my goodness, you know what? A lot of people don't seem to be talking about sex so much. This is the Victorian era, once more. Why aren't people talking more about sex? And there's a little bit of a crescendo, how he started thinking about how sex has a lot to do with everything. For financial reasons, Freud had to open a private practice as a clinical neurologist at just the age of 25. He needed to make money and he couldn't spend all of his time doing research, trying to find that fame. But this is where he got to know a man by the name of Jean-Martin Charcot. He was a French psychiatrist within Paris with whom Freud had the chance to work. Let it be known that they became friends and they worked together, but eventually Jean-Martin Charcot parted ways with him, like so many people are going to, as you're going to learn, because Freud really got obsessed too much with sex. But Charcot was the one who introduced Freud to the idea of hypnosis. You're getting sleepy. You're breathing slower, deeper, and when I snap my fingers. So Freud, you're going to learn, has a lot of hypnosis and hypnotherapy in his practice. We'll talk about that later. But here's a famous quote from Jean-Martin Charcot, which had a lot of influence on Freud. He said, "In this sort of case, it's always a question of the genitals. Always, always, always." And Jean-Martin Charcot was talking about this when he was mentioning females and neuroses, basically why a female may be acting a little peculiar. Now, if that sounds a little misogynistic, it's because it is, but let's continue. After returning to Vienna, a colleague told Freud, "Penis normalis dosum repertoire." So what does that mean? Penis normalis dosum repertoire. It's this idea that, and it was said in an offhanded comment to Sigmund Freud, but it translates to penis normally as a dose, repeat. So basically, you know what the cure is going to be? This person simply needs a good dose of penis repeatedly. And Freud took that to heart and said, maybe there's something to this. Maybe sex is a problem or a cure. There's something going on with sex because all these other physicians are talking about sex. And there's even if it's jokingly, this mention that sex seems to be a source of problems. So Freud started looking into childhood sexual abuse. And this is something that he found. So by 40 years of age, Freud was convinced that the primary cause of all neuroses, all problems, was S-E-X, sex. The problem was sex, sex, sex. So we should talk about sex, sex, sex. And this is what really brought Freud fame because of all of his talk about sex. He said a majority of his female clients claimed sexual abuse in their childhood. Again, remember, he only had female clients. Why did he almost exclusively have female clients, especially in the beginning? Because he had regular office hours. Those office hours were the usual 9 to 5. So why was it only women were coming to see him for therapy from 9 to 5? Because the men were off working. That's why. But what he found is that almost all of these female clients, I shouldn't say almost all, so many of these female clients claimed sexual abuse in their childhood. Freud published this theory only to claim a year later that the claims were fantasy. So he said, oh my goodness, women are getting sexually abused in childhood, people are molesting girls, and a lot of people listen to this, and he said a year later, like, well, that's what they're saying. I'm not saying that they're actually happening. These are just fantasy. In fact, he's quoted in his own book saying that these accounts of being sexually abused are hardly credible that a perverted acts against children were so general. He was saying, there's no way that everyone is getting as molested as they're claiming, because if all of these cases were true, it would seem as if though so many people get sexually molested as a child, but certainly that cannot be the case. And that's what he publicly claimed. But here's something interesting. Jeffrey Mason, 1984, he said, Freud went back and changed his original claim that these women were only fantasizing that they were sexually abused because nobody was listening to him. It basically was costing him fame because it was too much for people to take in at the time. There's no way people are getting sexually molested as much as Freud's research suggests, so why would we even listen to Freud? So what Jeffrey Mason claims is that Freud took a step back to save his research because he didn't want people to just simply look away. So what does that have to do with sexual abuse today, and what are the implications? So even though this is back in 1896, why is this a big deal? Why am I spending time, precious time on this video talking about Freud's look at childhood sexual abuse? Here's why. People really criticize Sigmund Freud for his ridiculous ideas. In fact, as you're going to learn, is that Freud said, all of us are only motivated by one of two things, sex and aggression. We'll talk about that in the instinct section coming up. But think of it this way. Freud was the first person that many people know of that openly started reporting that people were being sexually molested. Before that, it was swept under the rug and no one talked about it. Nowadays, we understand that sexual molestation happens. And unfortunately, it's not all that uncommon. Of course, it's horrible, but it's still out there. It's something that's been around. So one thing, if anything, people have to give Freud credit for is that he started people started just really investigating these claims that molestation was a real thing and it was happening all over the place. Well, that's the time. We're at 10 minutes, so I gotta close this up. When we come back in the next video, I want to finish up Freud's past, and we're going to talk about his sex life. We talked about his viewpoints on other people's sex life and how sex happened to children, but let's talk about it there. Sorry about the little stumbling I had there. I didn't know what words I wanted to say, so I'm human. I'm sorry. Hey, tune in next time. Episode 3 coming up.